All right, so we already talked a little bit about the Reformation. Okay, obviously with Martin Luther, and talked about the 95 Theses as arguments. Okay, and how we can see factions of Christianity breaking apart from the Catholic Church. Okay, and we talked about Calvinists. We talked about Ulrich and Zwingli and his viewpoints on Christianity, and how the Catholic Church is losing power, right? It's dwindling in power. And we mentioned about the Peace of Augsburg, which allowed some of these kingdoms within Central Europe to choose what type of religion they want to express. Now we're getting to England. Okay, and England goes through this Reformation process a little bit different. And a lot of people look at this and say, well, it was more of a personal issue for Henry VIII that led us to this Reformation. And I think it's interesting. I think it's something that needs to be talked about as England's going to go through this age of really expansion and growth. And people look at it, historians look at it and say it starts with Henry VIII. All right, so detail the importance of the Wars of the Roses. Oh, should be the Wars. All right. What do you know about Henry VIII's rule? All right, okay, so we talked about the War of the Roses yesterday briefly. Okay, I didn't want to confuse you. I know there's a lot of names there. There's a lot of monarchs and an overchange of leadership and this fight for the throne. So what do we know about the Wars of the Roses? What do we know about it? What about, let's start with the two families. So what two families were there? Amelia, go ahead. Yeah, good job. So you got the Lancaster family and the York family, and they are branches off of the throne of England. So right towards the end of the 1300s, Edward, King Edward, he passed away, and then that's led to new rulership, a new leader. And as soon as that leadership was in question, this pushed and prompted a fight for the throne. So who was rightful heir to the throne of England? And with the Lancasters, what was their symbol? What was their logo? What was it? Chris? The red rose. Yep, good job. And then the Yorks, they were what? White. The white rose. Yep, good. And this was brutal fights and wars and conflict over the throne for close to almost 100 years. And this was one of those things where it just shows really what lengths families would go to seek this power, to fight for this power. And with the Lancasters versus the Yorks, okay, this would push a fight for the throne and a lot of bloodshed for years to come. Right, we already talked about it. Okay, obviously Lancaster, York, Pennsylvania. If you guys ever travel there, ever been there before, you'll see a little bit about how Lancaster is known as the Red Rose City. And if you go to York, same thing. You'll see how it's the White Rose City. It's named after these families, which I think is interesting, right? You can note about it. There are a couple restaurants named after that within these areas within Pennsylvania, within these cities. So if you guys ever travel to York or Lancaster, try to take note of that. I know on some of the highways, they actually have an emblem of a red rose, or if you're going into York, they'll have a white rose. So if you go there you go. There's a history of it. Right? History of it. So what happens here? Who wins? Who wins? So towards the end, we actually have one of the children from the branch of the Lancaster family come back. His name was Henry Tudor, right? And as he comes back after this long fought-out civil war, pretty much for the throne, he unites England together. And he does so by marrying into the York family. And he brings, at least it's not glass shattering, I guess, right? Yeah, so he brings the families closer together, brings them to this conflict to a close. And he unites the families under the crown. All right, so with that, the Wars of the Roses, it was a long drawn out duke for the throne. And it's one of those things where, obviously today, if you guys ever read or heard saw Game of Thrones, hopefully you didn't watch it. It's a little too mature for you guys, I think, yet. But it is influenced by the Wars of the Roses, which is pretty cool. All right, so Henry VIII, he comes out of this long drawn out mess of the Wars of the Roses. He's actually the son of Henry the Tudor, who unites the families together. So Henry VIII, what do we know about him? What do we know about him? Caroline, what do you got?
He was interesting.
Yeah.
He separated from the Roman Church because he wanted to divorce his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, for not producing a male heir. Then it just led to more divorces and executions of scholars and people who tried to gain his trust and tried to help him, but he didn't like that.
Good, good. Yeah, so when you're looking at it, Henry VIII, he was kind of assigned a wife from the beginning. And this was a princess from Spain. So why do you think it's important for, let's say, the King of England to be married to a princess of Spain? Why is that important? Why? Go ahead.
That forces them to have an alliance.
Yeah, good job, good job. So you want these powers to come together. Overall, your kingdom's going to be a lot stronger if you have this unity, if you have this alliance, right? So as Henry VIII grown older, and he didn't produce a male heir to the throne, he decided to do something, right, rash. And he thought, you know what? I'm going to just divorce my wife here. She's not producing a son for me, a male heir to the throne. So he decides to divorce her. But the church, the Pope, said what? Did the Pope allow it? Why? No, not at all. He said, no, you can't do this. And if you think about it, maybe he had other reasons for it, right? Obviously, this faction, this divorce might lead to warfare between Spain and England, right? So he's trying to keep everybody united in a way to make sure that this divorce doesn't really topple the unity here in Europe. So that's one way of looking at it, maybe, right? So he does so anyway, and this is England's breakaway from really the Roman Catholic Church. So they form their own church, the Church of England. And with Henry VIII, he marries into it, obviously another wife. And with that, he obviously goes through a lot of turmoil, a lot of struggles, and he has many wives afterwards, which he killed many of the people closest to him, and many of his wives too, two of his wives. Some of it because of maybe adultery, some of it because, well, maybe they were trying to overthrow his power as well. One thing to know about Henry VIII, which I thought was interesting, is that he was a germaphobe. He was really afraid of any type of sickness or disease that might kill him. So he would like quarantine himself away from his family and other people. And a lot of times when he would have meetings, he'd sit way far away from everybody else. I thought that was interesting about him. Also, he had a jousting accident, so he actually got stabbed in the leg. You guys remember what jousting is? Yeah? Okay, so he got stabbed in the leg, and he had this wound on his leg, which really formed some sort of like a gangrene in a way, and it would constantly pus, and it was really gross and disgusting. And it was very smelly, right? And it actually traveled to his other leg as well, this sickness, and this obviously injury from him. And that may have led to his germophobia. I'm not sure. But in any case, I thought that was interesting about him. He would have this injury on his leg and pus out. You'd think he'd be somewhat of an attractive guy having 6 wives, I guess, but he really wasn't. He was larger than life.
That picture.
Right? That picture, he was huge. Yeah, and I think the artist did him a little bit of justice here. They must have had a filter placed on the painting, right? Caroline?
Interesting that his last wife, Catherine, I believe, wrote a book and made a school for educating women on reading and sewing stuff, I believe.
Oh, okay. All right. So that's interesting. All right. So with Henry VIII, there was a lot of good that came from his leadership. Yeah, everybody wants to focus on his 6 wives, and yeah, that, I guess. But in any case, he did grow the monarch, the crown, into a stronger power. Right. So yeah, it took some time. A lot of people say it was just his belligerence, and it just kind of came together. England came together under his decision making, and in a way, he pushed the Catholic rule out. He wanted to try to separate himself away from this Roman Catholic corruption in a way, this conflict, and this created more of a secular viewpoint to emerge within England, and to strive for more of a military strength. So he invested a lot within the Navy of England, which will build it up to become a stronger military power. And this is going to lead right into the Elizabethan age. So as Elizabeth I, one of his daughters, will come to power, she would lead this age of exploration for England and to grow it into becoming an imperialistic power. So you can say it kind of starts with Henry VIII, right? Yeah, he had a different life, right? He had a strange life when it came to his personal antics, but overall, when it came to growing England into a stronger power, you can maybe say it starts with Henry VIII. All right, is there any questions here? Henry VIII. Again, that's something that kind of overshadows his rule with his 6 wives and his weird personal life. Okay, here are your terms for today. All right, you got the Pilgrimage of Grace, 1536. So this is one thing that stems from Henry VIII's Act of Supremacy in 1534. As he's breaking away from the church, well, not everybody was for it, and this caused rebellions to spur all throughout England. Mary Tudor, another name for it, if you want to put it in parentheses beside her name, is Bloody Mary. Not the drink. You should know about that one anyway. Elizabeth I, Elizabeth in Era, and polity. All right, so the Pilgrimage of Grace, 1536. What do we have? What do we got? What do we have? Why? Go ahead. Thank you.
A popular revolt beginning in Yorkshire in October before spreading to other parts of northern England.
Yeah, good, good. So as England's going through this change, this separation from the Catholic Church, this is going to prompt people to rebel, right? Obviously, we know that when you're changing this religious structure that's been around for hundreds of years, and this loyalty to the Holy Roman Empire and the Pope, right? As Henry VIII is changing the dynamics of religion and of these religious traditions, right? This is going to prompt change, right? This is going to prompt people to maybe rebel and to see this as a bad decision. So many people throughout England decided to rebel against Henry VIII and to try to take his power. And the reason for it is because of the separation from the Catholic Church. Right? Again, this has been a structure for people for hundreds of years. And this drastic change that happened so quick, and literally because of a divorce and the Pope not allowing Henry VIII to choose another wife, right? This is prompting a lot of questions. People to question the authority of Henry VIII. Does that make sense? Over 200 people died in this pilgrimage of grace. So you can imagine that with the bloodshed and the killing, the execution of many of these people that were trying to overthrow Henry VIII's power. So that's why Henry VIII also gets that name. It's because he's brutal towards those who might rebel against his actions. All right. So you can look at it many different ways, right? You can say, oh, this breakaway from the Catholic Church, it was just, right? It was something that might brought somewhat of a distinction, a separation from, let's say, the corruption of the Catholic Church. And other people say, well, it is causing a structural rebellion, right? People see this change in this altercation, this move away from the Catholic Church, and they might not see and think of it as a good, just cause, especially if it's based over a relationship. Mary Tudor, Bloody Mary. What do we have for her? Ozzy, go ahead.
between England and Ireland in July 1560. He's best known for a vigorous adventure.
Yeah, good job, good job. So as Henry VIII, ruled over England for many, many years, his separation from the Catholic Church and taking a lot of funding away from these Catholic churches and, pushing it towards the buildup of a military and also to educate, people from England, citizens from England in a different viewpoint, right? This is going to push England in a different direction, and hence the Pilgrimage of Grace in 1536. So Mary the Tudor, as she's becoming queen, right, as Henry VIII dies, she wants to try to reverse these changes for Protestantism. She wants to try to revert back to the Catholic Church. And in doing so, she gets the nickname Bloody Mary. She wants to try to stop this movement to Protestantism, to this new branch, this new idea of Christianity. And her goal is to try to bring it back to the Roman Catholic Church. In doing so, she killed hundreds of people. And that's why she gets the nickname Bloody Mary. And again, it's to just try to get back to the Catholic roots. Unfortunately for her, because of these harsh decisions and utilizing the military in her path to try to change England back to Catholicism, more people pushed back against her. It actually did more harm than good. It changed people more to Protestantism and it accepted the views of Christianity rather than going back to Catholicism. So that's something interesting about Bloody Mary. Even though she was so powerful and trying to push things back to Catholicism, it only did more harm than good for her rule. All right, Elizabeth I. What do we have for Elizabeth I? What do we got? Parker, what do you got for Elizabeth I?
Queen. Era, I guess.
All right. Yeah, so she kicks off the Elizabethan age, right? The era of, sorry. But anyway, with Elizabeth I, she is the queen during this time after Mary, the Tudor Bloody Mary, and her goal is to try to have a clear separation with the church and the state. She thought, well, if we just continue down this path where religion is really dictating what goes on, it's only going to cause more hardship, more civil war, more revolts to occur. And she becomes a strong leader for all people within England. And with that clear separation, that devotion to the people of England, she's going to be seen as a powerful leader that leads England into a golden age, an age of exploration, an age of really military success against England's rivals. And she's known for being very successful. And she is also known as the Virgin Queen. And the reason for it is because really she is devoted to the people of England. That's what she pronounces, that's what she explains in a lot of her speeches. She's like, well, I'm married to the people of England. My goal is to be this strong, this just leader, lead us in this golden age. And that's how she's so successful. And politique is just that term describing how she's going to lead England in the right direction. And to make sure that these religious quarrels don't continue to happen under her rule. And again, to bring it to this golden age. Carolyn?
She also survived the Black Plague, and for the rest of her life, she wore heavy, very heavy lead-based white makeup on her face behind her scars.
Yeah, good. Yes, a lot of the pictures that you see, full paintings of her, she is really all in white. That's a good notion. Yeah, nice job. So yeah, Queen Elizabeth, like I mentioned earlier, was a Renaissance artist. Favorite of hers was William Shakespeare. We already talked about Shakespeare quite a bit, and how he's bringing a sense of culture and entertainment to England that really hasn't been seen before to this time. All right, good work. So now we're going to move to the PowerPoint. I only got a few slides here. All right, so like I mentioned, after the Wars of the Roses, it prompted Henry VIII to become king. And with that, he breaks away from the Catholic Church. And the reason for it is because he wanted to marry someone else. And the Pope said, nope, we're not going to allow this because this goes against a lot of our rules and establishments. Henry VIII obviously had an argument with that. He's like, for how corrupt you guys are, you're not going to allow me to divorce my wife, really? Because she couldn't really bring an male heir to the throne. So he separates totally from the Catholic Church. And we talked a bit about that already. But here are some of the leaders, the kings, the queens that follow suit right after Henry VIII and you can see their viewpoints when it comes to Catholicism, Protestantism, and what direction their leadership will move with their lead as the monarch. So I think it's interesting that it just kind of shifts back and forth, right? And obviously that's going to bring a lot of instability when it comes to their leadership and prompt many other forms of religion to emerge. So yesterday we read a little bit about the Anglicans, right? And the Anabaptists. Okay, we talked. Well, you guys read a little bit about that yesterday, and how the Anti-Baptists, their viewpoints are saying, you know what? Yeah, you can be baptized as a child, but you really can't make decisions for yourself as a child. But when you grow older, you have the ability to make these religious decisions, and that's when you become a true believer of God. And a good example of the Anabaptists today is what we already what you read about already with the Amish. So the Amish culture and how they're trying to separate themselves from the state, right? And the reason for it is because they're against really warfare, okay? And how maybe the state could lead to this warfare, this mistreatment of other people, and they want to try to stay separate. So that's why a lot of times when you look at the Amish culture, they don't embrace, they don't accept many of these new advancements in technology, or let's say, be a part of state doings. They don't go to public schools. And that clear separation is try to protect them, for them to seek their salvation. So that's something interesting that you read about yesterday with the Anabaptists. All right, so Henry VIII, we already talked about him already, right? And how he looks to break away from the Catholic Church. And he does so, again, because of a divorce that leads him to break away from the church. The Pope didn't want to recognize it. So he said, you know what? I'm going to create my own church. And I'm going to become the leader of the Church of England and the King of England at the same time, and separates himself from the Roman Catholic Church. All right, I already talked about that, so I'm just going to continue on here. All right, so the Act of Supremacy, like I mentioned, was that way of breaking away from the Catholic Church. Okay, and as he's doing so, this is prompting a lot of structural change. Okay, his idea is that he thinks that Catholicism, it brings a sense of structure that's needed for society. It sets and establishes a routine for people to continue. And he doesn't totally change every dynamic of life within England after he separates himself from the Catholic Church. He still sets that structure, that schedule that people need to go to church, the good moral values and ethics that come along with religion, right? He doesn't fully separate that. But overall, he looks to drastically change when it comes to creating more of a secular, a state control, and a church control authority within England. And we all know that he is the leader of both. And with that prompts the pilgrimage of grace. And that was one of your terms here for today. And the pilgrimage of grace is how these people rebelled against Henry VIII at first. Right? You can only imagine for hundreds of years, they represented the Pope, the Catholic Church, as this extreme priority, right? This extreme overarching ruler. And all of a sudden, Henry VIII comes in and breaks away from it. So this is going to prompt a lot of change, a lot of struggle, and where people rebelled against Henry VIII, which led to over 200 people dying and him killing a lot of these these rebellious people, these rebels. All right, so again, we talked about the pilgrimage of grace here already and how he's separating himself from the church. All right, so Edward and Mary Tudor. So as Henry VIII dies, right, he's not going to live forever. Henry Tudor, his son, okay, Edward the VI becomes the new king of England. And he's really young at the time. He's only about 10 years old. And he's led by a group of people, Protestant reformers. So their goal is to try to push Protestantism as much as possible, to continue this movement to break away from the Catholic Church. So he really didn't have much of a say, Edward VI, but for the most part, he was led by a lot of these Protestant reformers, the hands of the king, in other words. So this was a group of people leading Edward into this Protestant Reformation. All right, so as he dies, he doesn't live too long. Mary Tudor, Bloody Mary, comes into play. And for Mary Tudor, her goal is to try to change everything back to Roman Catholicism. So you can see this back and forth, right? This tug of war of Protestantism, of Catholicism within England. And this is just confusing people. This is pushing people against one another to form groups to rival one another. And Mary Tudor, she tried to kill as many Protestants as possible, any people that try to oppose her and her will to bring England back to the Roman Catholic Church. So you can imagine this family here, man, they just can't make up their mind. They're going back and forth between religious ideals and trying to kill people that might oppose their values, might oppose their religious ideology. All right, so we're coming to an end here. In any case, we're going to continue on with this, and then we're going to talk more about the Catholic Reformation for tomorrow. But with Mary Tudor, make sure you guys remember Bloody Mary. As Edward Henry's son, he passes away, she comes into power. Because remember, it was one of the biggest issues for Henry VIII is finding a male heir. And once Edward dies, his son, Mary Tudor comes into play and tries to reverse all the Protestant changes. Bloody Mary. Oh, my.